Okay,
Let's go live.
shall we go live?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick us off. Okay, Bill?
Okay, yeah.
So welcome back to the next edition of our Digital Culture Speaker Series. Today with us, we have Alisa Kwitney, and Bill Ayton will be introducing her. But before we get into that, we'll start like we always do with a land acknowledgement.
Arizona is home to 22 indigenous tribes.
Arizona State University's campuses are situated on the homelands of many tribal nations,
in particular the Ayton
and Peepash, and acknowledge the many indigenous communities who reside in this territory.
Skigik is the Ayton word that is now known as Phoenix, which was settled in 1881 by occupiers.
The ancestors of the Ayton, the Huhugam, created canals and utilized surrounding rivers that are the basis of the current irrigation system that feeds Skigik today.
These waterways have always been the foundation and livelihood of the residents within the valley. Throughout the past 500 years, the impact of colonialism have been detrimental to indigenous lands and languages, affecting their livelihood.
Many people who live in the Southwest are unaware of this history. Furthermore, ASU's indigenous student community consists of over 3,000 strong,
not including faculty, staff, and alumni, who continue to thrive, educate, and advocate for the strengthening of indigenous ways of life.
As the Ayton call it, Himdak, the way of life for the Ayton, encompassing their culture, traditions, identity, and being. As Ayton and indigenous peoples,
our identity is tied to the land. Like our own bodies, we must respect and care for it, and we urge everyone to do the same.
We challenge you to educate yourself about the history and the communities who continue to thrive today.
Moving forward, it is vital to honor and respect
that you are always
on indigenous land.
Thank you. So today with us, we also have Bill Ayton, who will be moderating this discussion, and he'll also be introducing Alisa. Bill Ayton is a faculty associate here at Arizona State University and an artist in residence at Meteor Studio. He's a figurative painter dealing with expressionist, surrealist, and symbolist and political themes, and also currently working with digital 3D and AR/VR. And I'll let Bill go ahead and continue on introducing Alisa. Actually, before I get there, we'll be moderating Q&A through the chat. So Bill will be reading questions from there. Okay, Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure. Good, and you can see some of my art behind Diana Ayton Shanker, who has a similar name to me for some reason, including a portrait of Diana. Anyway, enough about Diana. This is the Alisa Kwitney show. Yeah, I've known Alisa for, we think, 10 to 15-ish years, sort of. She lives not far away from where I am in the Hudson Valley. I'm just going to read her bio that she sent. Alisa Kwitney is the critically acclaimed author of numerous novels and graphic novels, including Mystik U with DC Comics, Rogue Untouched, Marvel Aconyte, I think, and the Cadaver Queen series with Harlequin Scholastic. At Wesleyan University, she received the Horgan Prize for Best Short Story, and her thesis for Columbia's MFA program became her debut novel, Till the Fat Lady Sings, which was a New York Times New and Noteworthy book pick. Alisa's novels have been selected for Barnes & Noble's Discover Great New Writers program, and she has twice been nominated for the prestigious Eisner Award for her graphic novel writing. She was a staff editor at DC/Vertigo. Vertigo is the grown-up version of DC, where she worked with Neil Gaiman, who's also British, which is important, I find, on the Sandman, and discovered the writer Mike Carey, The Girl with All the Gifts, and assigned him to the Lucifer series, which I just discovered became a TV show that I hadn't realized. She went on to work with Neil Gaiman on the Norse Book of Mythology and to write the nonfiction book Sandman, the King of Dreams. She currently co-hosts Endless, a Sandman podcast about the comic book series and forthcoming Netflix series. Yes, there's a new Netflix series starring, Alisa, you didn't know the other. Tom Sturridge is the star, in case you didn't know. Okay, good. And you can find her at alisakwitney.com. You can look that up after this. And other things like Twitter, what are you again?
At A. Kwitney.
A. Kwitney, at A. Kwitney. And you're also on Instagram.
Yes.
K. Witty, I think. Good. Anyway, that's enough from me. And now over to Alisa Kwitney.
And
Wow.
Elisa, you can share your screen whenever you're ready also.
Okay, well, I'll just start by saying, Bill, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you guys about world building. I'm understanding that a lot of you, usually I teach writers and artists. And one of the first questions I ask is, do you identify more as an artist or more as a writer? And I am understanding that you guys are a different kind of group in that you are crafting virtual realities and virtual worlds. So it's a different kind of world building. And I figure I can talk a little bit, but I'm hoping that you all will let me know your questions, and then I can gear things more specifically to you and answer things that are most of interest to you. So I'm just looking here. Yes. All right. So I'm just going to start with my really not terribly wonderful looking keynote, which is Mac for PowerPoint. It's not pretty, guys, but it's the best. If I don't do something for 2 years, I forget how to do it. So this is what I got. So let's start with this desktop 2. All right. Am I sharing?
Yeah,
You
you
are
are.
sharing.
World building.
Right. So now I press play. All right.
Yep.
So as you see, we start with 7 tips and 3 bonus tips for the same low price. Now, this is probably trivia you don't need to know, but the reason that magazines in the old days and now, all these things on the internet say 7 tips or 5 tips or 10 tips is certain things get people more excited. And I hoped futilely that, the 7 tips would be all exciting to you. How do I go on to the next screen? What do I click on? Why doesn't it just happen? Wasn't this all
Maybe
easier?
space bar, page down, something like arrow key.
Oh, here we go. All
Yeah.
right. So to begin with, a lot of what I learned as an editor at the Vertigo imprint of DC Comics is what has formed me. I did go to, I went to Wesleyan and I was an English major, but I took a lot of other things, a lot of anthropology and sociology, which definitely help with world building. And then I got my MFA in fiction writing at Columbia, but it's really the stuff that I learned at DC that formed me. Okay, so here I've got, let's see if I can. So on the far left is Karen Berger, who is the head of the imprint. Behind her is Lou Stathis. And next to him, his assistant at the time was Axel Alonso, who became for a while the editor-in-chief of Marvel. Next to Karen is Shelley Roberg, who became Shelley Bond, then later became the head of Vertigo as well. That's me, the only person with my eyes closed. You got it. Stuart Moore, also wonderful writer and editor. That's Julie Rottenberg, who went on to write for Sex and the City, and Murphy Fogelnest and Dean Motter. And the other person that you see in this big, gorgeous office is Jeanette Kahn, who was the president of DC and really was the person who sort of spearheaded this whole idea of creator-owned comics. So where do I go to this? All right, so playing in someone else's sandbox. So when I've written for DC Comics, even at the time that I was working on staff, I was also able to write comics. And later when I left to write, and I ended up having sort of a dual career where I wrote novels and I wrote in many different genres. And I also wrote comics or graphic novels. And so I've written for DC, I've written for Marvel, and I've also written creator-owned stuff. When I am writing in somebody else's sandbox, these are not my characters. This is not the world that I've invented. The way I pitch and sell is by making it personal. So this is Mystik U. Mystik U, well, a little later on, I'll just wait. You can also see me, right? So I'm gonna find, oh, where are you, Mystik U? Hang on, here we go. So this is Mystik U, and I think I'll just throw some things at the dog. There, that'll wake him up. Good. So with Mystik U, it was a really interesting genesis because I ended up doing some work on a crossover with Batgirl for DC Comics. And then they asked me to pitch a creator-owned series. So I pitched a creator-owned series set in a college with cosplayers that develop magical powers. And it got backburnered after they flew me out. I don't know. There was a lot of power weird things happening. And I thought, okay, this is dead. This is dead. And about a year later, they called me back and said, we'd like you to do it, except this time it's no longer creator owned. It's entirely DC characters, but you can choose which ones. And so you may ask, how do you go from writing your own characters in your own pitch to changing it completely into, you know, somebody else's sandbox? And the answer is I made it personal. I thought, well, what was the key core of the story that I wanted to tell? And the core of the story that I wanted to tell was, you know, going to college, you may think that you're really good at something. I was very good at philosophy in my high school in New York City. But when I went to Wesleyan, I discovered that I am not a particularly good philosophy student. And it was sort of a shocking readjustment to think, well, okay, maybe that's not the thing I'm going to be doing. So I wanted to write about all these characters discovering their magical potential. But in the end, Zatanna, who's the one who is supposed to be the most powerful one, is the one having the most trouble harnessing her power. But I have a team here. I'll just mention, is anyone here? Will I see chat or anything? Like, I don't know who's here. I don't know if you guys are comic book fans. So I'll just very quickly. Okay, at least Olivia is, yay, I can see a face and a hand. Okay, excellent. So this is Zatanna. And I've been a fan of Zatanna. I'm going to give a little bit of background and I'll blather. So Zatanna I love, but she's traditionally been done very cheesecake. And once she goes into the college, what I asked Mike Norton, the wonderful artist, to do is give her clothes that are reminiscent. I'm trying to find some of her clothes. God damn. Okay, here we go. So you can you see some of Zatanna's outfits here? Her clothes are reminiscent of the magician assistant uniform costume that she wears, but it's always like a white shirt, a vest, or there's some elements, but it looks like things a college student would wear. So my request was that she never be posed or look like cheesecake. She looks attractive, but this is the bad boy. His name is Sebastian Faust. He's the son of Felix Faust, the evil magician. He hadn't been used a lot, but he can't control his eyes. They suck out your soul if you look at them. Haven't we all dated someone like that? And so he's the bad boy and the love interest, even though he has his own arc. And I wanted him to be the beefcake. So I asked Mike, I said, oh, in the scene, he's in the dorm room, they're all getting ready for bed, and then they get zapped into this other dimension. I said, but he's the only one who's not fully dressed. And Mike just took this and like constantly has this character, shirtless and sort of a little, looking cute and sexy, but not dressed. The reason that I did that, all joking aside, is it was part of the atmosphere that I wanted. I wanted this to be my main character as a female character. And I wanted to have that be a little nod to the comics tradition that, somehow in this world where people are fighting, women are posed in these provocative poses. I didn't want it to be distracting, though. I didn't want it to take away from the reality. This is June Moon, who's also Enchantress. Traditionally, June Moon and Enchantress, June Moon becomes Enchantress, and that's how she accesses her power. I wanted to play with that a little. And I wanted at first, there's a whole scene where June Moon is putting on makeup to become Enchantress, the way that a lot of us experiment with different identities and costuming in college. Later on, she magically transforms into Enchantress. This is David, and I can't remember his last name now, but he's Dr. Fate. And I wanted a Dr. Fate, since Dr. Fate traditionally wears a turban with this ruby of power, I wanted him not to be a white dude. So I did some research there. And Pia is African-American, Black. I think, sorry, I as things have shifted, I grew up saying Black, and I've had to train myself, and now I'm trying to go back. But anyway, I created her as another character. She's a necromancer. Her powers are a little disgusting. I love body horror myself. And so I created a lot of body horror in this series. So she accesses her power. It's this gloopy effluvia that comes out of her hands, like a goop. And the other character who comes out a little later is Plop. So Plop was inspired. My daughter was at Bard and she was describing how disgusting the bathrooms were. And I thought, oh, you know, there's this witch thing about not cutting your fingernails and letting anyone get a hold of it because they could use it magically. And I was thinking about how if all these students have magical potential and you've got all the fingernails and snot and other body fluids dripping down into the bathroom and they collect, it would probably not take a lot to animate that. So that was that. Anyway, so that was Mystik U. The other thing I'll just mention, I'm probably spending way too long on one slide, but I realized how much I have to say. It was really important to me that the backgrounds to this be really evocative. In order to make this work, I wanted, I'm trying to find another page with a good background. Where's a good background? Oh, and here's you know, one of the Greek houses.
Do you want to stop sharing and hold that up to the camera so we can see it bigger? Just a
Oh, what do I do?
pro tip. Just
Pause
hit
sharing.
stop sharing. There should be a little bar somewhere.
Oh, I thought I did stop sharing. Oh, yeah.
No, you did. Yes, that's better.
Okay.
Thanks.
So now can you see me?
Yes, we can still we can see you, and the book's a bit bigger as well.
Okay, good. So wait, what happened here? I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay. So so I wanted an artist who would really go to town on these backgrounds. I can no longer see any of you, so I feel oddly wait,
We can see you, Lisa.
All right. Well, of course, you guys seeing me and me not being able to see you is
We can see you.
oh, so here's another beautiful scene of the campus. It's based a little bit on Vassar. All right, so wait, how do I go back to the wait, how do I go back?
Yes. Share screen, green button at the bottom.
Yeah, now I can't see that because something's changed in here. Hold on. Okay, there you all are. All right, share screen.
Okay.
Desktop 2. Okay. All right, so
You're not sharing.
I'm not. I mean to share. Hold on.
If you
Okay,
click
now yeah. I
share
got it.
screen and then
There we
yeah,
go.
you're good.
All right. So that was all about making it personal. And as you know, what I was trying to say is that personal, both in terms of all of the characters, I tried to invest with their own arc, but also I tried to create all the things that I personally love. Obviously, you know, there are other writers who have other things that they want to do. I love romance and body horror and humor. And so all of those elements tend to be in most of the things that I write. All right. Did I go to the next slide? No, I didn't because, all right. So now, ground fantasy in reality. So the opposite, when you're writing your own world and characters, then I do the opposite. Instead of trying to find my own story in somebody else's world and characters, I try to really ground things in the real world. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Okay, wait, I'm gonna stop share so you can see me again. Hold on. I have an arrow that's darting around here like a, oh crud. Maybe I'll just stop trying to, I don't know where my arrow went.
If it's difficult, just hold it close to the camera then, I guess.
All right, so this is, can you guys see this?
Yes.
That's good.
I have two books, Cadaver Queen and Corpse and Crown. And I'll explain, I know they sound like a demonic pub. And I had this idea for doing an alternate history. And basically the idea I had was in the leading up to World War I, Edwardian England and Wilhelm Kaiser's Germany got into an arms race. And that arms race was with these huge dreadnoughts, these big battleships. And what if instead they'd gotten into an arms race using automated cadavers? What if Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, had been a thing, and then everyone started to produce these automated cadavers to be soldiers? So that was my original thought. And then I just start to ground it as much as possible in what I know of the period. So for me, I kept everything, there was a certain amount of crazy sexism where women were told by the head doctor of England at the time, real, I didn't make this up, that if you studied too much, your womb would atrophy and, your face would fall apart and all of this because too much blood was rushing to your brain, and women's brains are not built for that. So I thought about that kind of sexism. And then I also just thought about, well, okay, so the arms race was held off as long as Queen Victoria was alive because Kaiser Wilhelm really liked his grandmother. When she died, that's what caused, the arms race to accelerate and led to World War I in part. And I thought, well, what if, when Queen Victoria was looking like she was about to die, a bunch of doctors turn her into an automated cadaver as well. So they're really in charge. And then I began to create the more personal story about, Victor Frankenstein, who had been a medical student until he found out something he shouldn't, about Elizabeth Lavenza. In the original, she's Victor's fiance, and I make her the only female medical student in the school. So I really tried to stay in as much reality as I could. I ended up thinking to myself, because I did a deep dive. I know so much more about Victorian England and medical instruments. My brain is filled with some weird things. But one of the things that I ended up going back to is I learned that Mary Shelley was inspired by Galvani. I can't remember his first name anymore, but Galvani was, he was one of those people who discovered, you get a frog's leg and you zap it, it's just the frog's leg. It's not even got a frog attached and it jumps. And he said, there's this vital life force, this animal electricity, and we could reawaken it with electricity. Now we now know that he was wrong and Volta was right, who was his rival, Volta, who's the originator of the battery. But I just thought, okay, what if Galvani had been the right one? And so my entire Cadaver Queen world is a world in which Galvani was right and Volta was wrong. And everything the Victorians believed they knew about medicine was correct. And so there's no blood type. You can take someone's arm and put it onto somebody else's, arm, and there's no rejection. And in fact, the arm can actually have some of the consciousness of its previous owner, who was a murderer. So I tried to make all the B movie stuff that I knew work. And then I tried to ground it and make it as authentically emotional as possible. So that was how I came up with that particular world. Another world that I created is a sort of werewolfy world. This world is sort of set in the Hudson River Valley, and these are werewolf books, but they're not, people were like, are they paranormal romance or are they urban fantasy? I'm very strange. And so in this book, basically, lycanthropy is an STD or STI. So it's very much a story of you know, relationship problems and lycanthropy. And what else did I mean, I wanted it to be very close to the real world and a little different. So we had a restaurant that was originally a stagecoach at the turn of the century in Pine Plains, but it constantly was turning over different chefs. And so I turned it into a restaurant where the chef, anyone who took over the restaurant, was driven insane by all the ghosts of the previous chefs, and then would join the whole, you know, so obviously each new chef was going to have a harder and harder time. And so I used things from the real world to create this alternate Hudson River Valley. All right, going on to the next slide. Okay, another thing I've learned along the way is don't censor yourself. I wrote a Batgirl story for this big crossover, and in one of the scenes, I just wanted Stephanie Brown to be trying to figure out where she can go to the bathroom before the big battle, you know, and it's hard because it's a landscape without a lot of cover, and she's wearing, you know, a Batgirl suit, which is like a big tight unitard. And I don't understand why you would wear a big tight unitard to fight in, but I thought if you did, I think going to the bathroom would be a major concern. I did not think they would let me keep it in, but they did. So if you censor yourself, you'll never know what you can actually end up doing. Okay, collaboration. So when I write novels, obviously I'm working on my own. That said, I'm trying a new thing. The book I'm working on, just beginning now, I'm going to get a bunch of my actor friends to help me improv a bunch of scenes and use that as inspiration. A lot of people do that with scripts and screenplays. I don't know if people do it as much with novels, but I really wanted to punch up the humor in the situation. Most of the time when I collaborate with artists. And when I'm teaching little kids, I always say, if you're the writer and someone else is the artist, you know, the artist isn't your slave. And when I'm teaching older people, I say, the artist is not your bitch. So if you're writing a script, you want to inspire the artist. And I am a huge believer in collaborating. So I am usually a co-creator with the artist I'm working with. And I want to talk to them directly. I think a lot of times they're scared because a lot of writers are like, I wrote the script, just, you know, draw what I told you to. And I really I developed this really close relationship, particularly with Alain Morissette, who's, I'll show you. We're working on something I can't talk about too much right now, but I can show you. We did an Edgar Allan Poe lap story. Can you see some of this? Oh, so my mandate with this Edgar Allan Poe story was to pick an Edgar Allan Poe story and make it worse. That's the mandate. So I picked a little story called Berenice, which is a lot about sex and teeth. And I made it worse. And we went to town. I mean, I write this as a script, but it was our collaboration that allowed for panels like this. And, you know, that's part of the world. In a horror world, you want a feeling of foreboding. You want, you know, and as I say, one of my favorite things is combining horror and humor. So, oh wait, this is a bit, can I show something that's a little naughty, or is that okay? I guess I won't censor myself. I'll only find out later.
Don't censor.
Okay, so
also, we can't, if you want to share, it's very difficult to see, you know, details. So maybe that's good. Maybe how naughty is it?
No, it's not So here's the thing. I never want to show anything explicit. But in this, the character keeps taking teeth, perfectly healthy teeth, out of his fiance's mouth. And she thinks he's doing it to help her. And meanwhile, she's still holding on to a little independence. She's riding her bicycle. Now, the Victorians, again, there were some messed up people. They thought that when women rode bicycles, it would give them bicycle face. I kid you not. It was like, you know, you would freeze in whatever the wind-blown position. So she's riding the bicycle and he's trying to take it away from her. And then he says, "This is not good for you. Wait, what's this?" And if you can see, when she gets off the bicycle, the seat is all chewed up. Well, we're going to discover that every tooth he removes and puts carefully away is returning to her, but not to her mouth. And that will lead to the horrific final, which is all implied. We don't see anything. And it really, so in order to make the punchline of this horror comedy work, it really required an understanding of each other's rhythms and patterns, and you know, humor and horror is a lot in timing, pacing, atmosphere, what you stress, what you emphasize. So a lot of the advice I give to people is about how you collaborate, how you get out of this competitive mode, or this, you know, you're just my hired hand. Okay. Visual storytelling. So I do a lot of workshops where I teach people visual storytelling for prose. And one of the things I've learned is just to give yourself the assignment. So if I'm writing a novel, sometimes I just break it down into, okay, Elisa, right now, think of yourself like a casting director. Think of yourself as a location scout or an art director, and I'll break it into chunks, a prop person. Think of yourself as head of costume and wardrobe. And I make sure that I'm really thinking of the visuals, and then I pare it back. So I do a lot of unwriting, and that's so that I'm inspiring the artist, or if it's a novel, the reader. But in a novel, I'm collaborating with your imagination. I want you to fill in the blanks, but I don't want to give you nothing. Like some writers are like, oh, I just leave it up to the reader's imagination. But I want stuff that evokes something for the reader, so they start to paint the picture and they fill in. You know, so I think of it as dancing with the reader as well as dancing with the artist. Okay, settings reveal character. By the way, I don't know about you guys, like I sit in the same place and I'm hot and then I'm cold, and I just, so anyway, all right, settings reveal character. So the places where we live and we work define us as much as we define them. And so it's, I always, you know, I give exercises, and I wish, I know you're, I guess whoever's out here, many of you are faceless, so I can't, but I'll tell you one of my exercises and you can try it later. So I say, I want you to describe to me a gorgeous old mansion, the kind of mansion that was once the home to fabulously wealthy people, but the people who live there now, who are descendants, have run out of money. What do you see that shows you that this was a place of great wealth and is no longer? Is it just what's there, or is it also what's missing? So that's one exercise. Another exercise I give is, I want you to describe to me a hermit's dwelling in the middle of the wilderness, but the hermit living there was once a rock star. What do you see? What clues are there that both say hermit and former rock star? So those are two exercises that I use. Usually when I'm giving this to groups, I'll divide people into small groups and let them collaborate, which frees people up. Again, huge fan of collaboration. How are we going for time? Should I be going faster, slower, sideways?
You're doing great.
You're good. Just keep it up. I'll keep out the way.
Wait, I'm gonna have a drink of water then. It's not poison, there's elderberry juice in there. All right, okay. Worlds have sensibilities, somber or trippy, sinister, sophisticated. So a lot of times when people are writing something realistic, they think, I don't have to world build. You are always building a world. The England of the mid-90s in Four Weddings and a Funeral is not the same England that you see in Trainspotting. Those are two different worlds, and it's the same place, and it's actually the same time period, I think. Right?
Scotland in Trainspotting.
Oh, Scotland. Well,
that's why it's different.
That is what, well, but that's not the only reason, because I think there are other things. Letter to Brezhnev. Okay, that's a little earlier, but there are gritty films, and that was the wrong one, but there are gritty films set in England in the 90s.
Fact checking you. It's okay, you're good.
No, but there are other gritty things set in England as well. I'm just spacing on them right now. Now, the England of Fleabag, which is a dark comedy, kind of contains elements of both things. So some of my books have skewed darker and others lighter, but I always try to have, an awareness of what's the range? How do I want my reader or my audience to feel? And I'll talk, what's my next slide? I mean, I'll talk about something else related to this, but I just stuck in it. So a lot of what I learned about world building came from Sandman. And one of the great things that I learned from Sandman and from Neil Gaiman is to create a world where things connect. Neil was so good at planting a seed in one story that he picked up in another, which made you feel this universe had this kind of coherence and purposefulness, and that you had to pay attention to all of these details and try and connect dots. The other thing is he didn't connect every dot. He did leave room for future stories, for things to reside in your imagination. This was a New Avengers. Oh, funny story about this one. So they gave me a mandate to create a novel that was a cross between the breakout storyline that Brian Bendis had done. He's a wonderful writer. And, and I could make it my own. I could change the characters around a bit. And at that time, I think only the first Avengers movie had been out. And I loved the romantic tension between Black Widow and Hawkeye. And I could talk for an entire hour about why they've screwed that up. I think that Olivia, I can't see anyone else, but your nodding is like giving me so much fuel and help. So I thank you for being on camera.
Keep nodding, Olivia.
Yes, nod. So the thing is, I think for years, people have misunderstood what romance is. I love lots of different genres. I love science fiction and fantasy, literary fiction, which is a genre, and romance. And people are always like, romance. It's just like a lot of sentimental, I'm like, no, you don't understand. Romance is all about desire. And just as a mystery gets played out very carefully before it's satisfied, romance is about, turning up the heat and seeing the specificity of the connection between two characters and finally having it satisfied in a way that feels both inevitable and yet surprising. And instead, people just screw it up again. Anyway, sorry, I'm off on my own. It's just, anyway. So I decided that I was going to write and have, if you wished that Black Widow and Hawkeye had a better relationship, you might enjoy this. But anyway, so they said I could change the characters around, and there was only one woman in the original. I'm trying to remember who it was. I wanted Black Widow, and I think there had just been Spider-Woman. So I said, okay, so I want Black Widow. And at the time, the editor said to me, oh, so you want to have Black Widow instead of Spider-Woman? I said, no, you see, you have a bunch of dudes and only one woman. I want another woman. So why would I take out the one woman you already have in the storyline? So yeah, I think people have gotten better about thinking that there could be two women, or, two Asian, it's just like, for a long time, it's like, well, you want one of, it was like the opposite of Noah's Ark. If you were going to have anyone who wasn't a white dude, you could have one of them. So, sorry. Oh, this is Rogue. So I was supposed to do another one of these little, shared universe novels. And what I didn't realize is, we were going to have a pandemic, and my mom moved in with me, and all was chaos and madness. And I do not even remember how I managed to write this book. But with Rogue, I got to do, I pitched like a restart of the Rogue character. I wanted to give her a new beginning. And I thought of her as a waitress in a small town, kind of like Sookie Stackhouse. And I just, I wanted some of that feel of, I thought Gambit, who's from Louisiana, which is near where Rogue grows up in Mississippi. So I got them together more quickly. And I have to admit that my favorite part of all of this was the beginning sections. Oh, but I can tell a story that will help you understand some of the pitfalls of world building. So I was thinking, who would be a big baddie to use? And just randomly, I picked the pig. The pig is a character who's like big pig, and I couldn't figure out what his powers were. He didn't seem to have any besides being a big pig, but it amused me. And so I started with him. And then I started to think, well, okay, I'm looking at the artwork. And if this were a real person, how would he hold himself up? He's like so top heavy. I think he'd need hand canes. And then I thought, is he going to be using, canes? And he's then the only person with a disability and a deformity, and he's the bad guy. So I realized that was a problem. And one of the ways you can recognize, I've seen there's a lot of YA authors that I know who've done world building and have accidentally stepped into yikes territory. The great thing about, getting older and having friends who have, who use wheelchairs, friends of different backgrounds, is I can hear their voices in my head saying, Elisa, I think you've stumbled into yikes territory. So I realized I had to rethink the pig being my big bad. I actually did something you really shouldn't do because it was the middle of the pandemic. I just found another obscure Marvel character to be my big bad. The pig's still in there, and I found a twist. But there's another character who is the big bad. But I forgot to ask Marvel for permission. And Marvel are like, this is so verboten. So I handed in the book finally. And my editor said, Elisa, we need to talk. And so anyway, I said, it's going to be fine. I'm going to write Marvel a letter explaining why I had to suddenly substitute this other big bad. And I wrote them a letter saying, I realized that the pig was a problem, and this is why. And they looked at my letter and said, you're fine. Use that other character. So anyway, I hope that was a helpful digression. I'm going to go on now. All right. These, I think we are now into my bonus tips, actually. This is good. Okay. So these are 3 tips that I've picked up along the way. One is from when I was at DC, Paul Levitz, who was not only the publisher and the president at different times, he also wrote Legion of Superheroes for years and years. And Denny O'Neil. Denny was a Batman editor who was a phenomenal Batman writer of the 70s. He created Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul of the Batman lore. He died recently, but he taught me so much. Anyway, they would give these talks. And one great things that they said is, when designing a character, give everybody a limp and an eye patch, meaning give them a distinct way of moving, a physicality, give them some bit of costuming that is distinctive so that even if they're far away, you can recognize them. And I do this even in my prose. I try to think about what is most distinctive about my characters and remind you enough so that you can see them in how they stand and how they move. Do they fidget? My son loves to take a coin. He's learned how to take, a coin and pass it through all of his fingers, which is, I just love it when somebody has, that's That's the limp in the eye patch, you know, that's some physicality that helps you see and know something about the character. Okay, point number 2, this was from Neil. Don't connect the dots. Allow readers or viewers to make connections. So if you, Neil said, you know, if the more intelligent you assume the reader or the viewer is, the more intelligent they will credit you with being. So, you know, put things out there to be connected, and then don't connect it. Let the reader do the work. The last thing is you have got to read. If you don't like actually using your eyeballs to read novels, and I know many people don't, use audiobooks or go back and forth between, you know, your ears and your eyes. But dear God, you must read. And there are some particular things which you need to read if you're going to build a world. First of all, read about the fall and rise of empires. Read about the sociology of different cultures. Read about first encounters between indigenous peoples and, you know, and other peoples, but read it from different points of view. Dear God, don't just read, you know, Custer's memoir or the equivalent, because if you don't, you will, you know, do what unfortunately many writers have done. You'll create, you know, Eye of a Planet, where the, you know, the mollycoddles, you know, have suddenly brought culture and civilization to the schmunzies. And I don't see why anyone would be offended by this. This is my made up planet. And yeah, and I don't probably need to tell all of you why this is still a problem. And so you have to read a lot. You know, it's cool to know things like George R.R. Martin knew so much, not just about the Wars of the Roses, but also about Spain and the whole Moorish Empire. I'm probably going to say this, it's Cordoba, right? Not Cordoba, Cordoba. There's words that I read all the time, but say almost thank you. So Cordoba was the place to be in the 10th and 11th century. If you know about this and know about the coolness of this, it will just enrich your worlds that you are creating. So those are a lot of things that I have said. And yeah, we've got a little time left, so we could Q&A it.
Yes, a lot of good things, a lot of very interesting, informative, and thanks, that was terrific. Yeah, so if anyone has questions. Sorry,
wait,
what?
How do I stop share?
There's a little bar, says stop share.
No, but I can't ever find my mouse. My mouse just goes hiding.
Probably on the desk.
No, it's one of those finger things. So it's.
Oh, it's a trackpad? Yeah, you did it.
I did it, but now I can't see. Ah, there we are. Okay.
You're good. Okay, yeah, so if anyone has any, I have some questions that I can rush in with if necessary, but I'm hoping I don't have to. If anyone wants to type them in the chat, is that Olivia has a question?
Okay.
Are you typing? Or you can speak. You can also.
Hey, can you hear me, Elisa?
One of the weddings from 4 Weddings and a Funeral is in Scotland. Thank you, Diana. Sorry. Okay.
Sabotaged by my own wife.
Elisa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm speaking kind of quietly because I'm here in the library. Just want to say thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I'm a huge Sandman, Neil Gaiman fan, and so women in leadership, world building, Sandman, there was no way I was going to miss this. I have so many questions. I think my first one really touches on you sharing about your history at Vertigo. And if you could explain or just share a little bit about how you did and do balance managerial and creative roles at a major publishing house. How did you do that?
Oh, sure. So by the way, if you're interested in Sandman, I'm doing a Sandman podcast with my friend Lonnie Diane Rich. We've been going through a reread of the Sandman, and now we've actually got a little break for 2 of the weeks are going to be my interview with Karen Berger, who is my boss, and then we'll be doing the Sandman, the Netflix series. So in terms of going back and forth between managerial and creative roles, the wonderful thing about DC in the 90s is it was just part of the culture. So Dick Giordano was the vice president and he was in his 60s or 70s, and we needed a fill-in inker. And Karen said, why don't you ask Dick? So I call up the vice president. I'm an assistant editor. I'm like, Dick, Karen wanted to ask if you could do the fill-in inking. And he's like, sure. And then he comes in. I'm like, and usually like you have to ask deadlines but he was very responsible. Can you imagine if I had to yell at the vice president of the company for being late? I don't know, in terms of going back and forth, I think that it's something that we actually all do. If you write something or you draw something, the person who writes it or draws it isn't the same person who a day or a week later comes back and looks at it critically and says, something wrong with the foreshortening, or I'm not sure that all of this is balanced right, or something about this is not quite, hitting. I have to re-examine how the character arcs are working in this scene. So I think that going back and forth between the creating self and the editing self is something we always do. I tried personally to always remember how scary it is on the other side. Like I know as an editor that I'm juggling all these things and you've sent me in something and I haven't had time to look at it. But when I'm a writer, I'm like, they hate it. They've looked at it. They hate it. So I try to send emails and texts and say, I haven't read it yet. I really am going to, I haven't, just so people are updated about what's going on. And then I often will do headlines like, okay, this is great. There are some things that we're going to tweak, but nothing structural. And so I try to keep that awareness of what it's like on the other side. I don't know if this is properly answering your question, but I know a lot of editors will say, I'm a really good editor, but I'm incredibly harsh and direct. I feel like being a professional means just being able to take it, And I think that these people are deluded and they will not edit me because none of us really outgrow artistic insecurity. Some of us pretend to. So yeah, I don't know if did that answer your question?
And more. Thank you so much.
Oh, all right.
Great question. Any more chat questions, or shall I jump in? I'm going to jump in since
Diana has her hand up.
Oh, Diana has it. Sorry.
It's a little hand.
It's a little hand. Well, but I don't want to step on Bill's line. Actually, he's echoing. Oh, there. So that was wonderful, and I learned so much, Alyssa. It was great. World building seems more timely than ever, right? We're kind of in the process in our world today of rebuilding what our world's going to be. So I loved how you talked through all the people in that photograph at the beginning. That was the world you were building. And then you show us Mystik U, and you talk through all the people there of that world that you created. And I'm wondering, in grounding fantasy and reality, how much of what's happening around us in the world today and our need to build worlds comes into your creative practice?
It always does. I mean, I think that for me, I have to pick one thing to focus on at a time. I can't look at everything at once. And I think we get bombarded by so much right now. And, I am as guilty as any of us of just letting the news, rush in at me. So it's like, some horrible thing is happening, where all the manatees in Florida are dying because their food source is being choked out by pollution. And then there's all the horrible pipeline stuff, and there's climate change being ignored. So when I am picking a project, I have to begin to protect myself a little from having too much information, because the world is too much, I think, to focus on all at once. So I will take some aspect of the world and the future that I want to talk about or emphasize, and I'll really try and focus in on it. And I'm doing a time travel story right now that's between the present and the 70s, and I'm trying to have some fun with that and think about what we knew and didn't know in the 70s. And I think one of the things that I would like at a certain point is to acknowledge that, people were saying a lot of the things that we now are saying, in the 70s, but something happened in the 80s, 90s, and aughts where everyone just sort of, went into a fugue state for a bit, like when you turn on the bathroom tap and you forget that it's running and you flood the bathroom. It does feel like something like that happened. But I think that when you are focusing on the world, you can't write about everything. You can't tell all of the story at once. I don't know if that answered it.
I think so. Olivia's put a couple of questions in the chat. So
Okay.
because she's in the library and doesn't want to speak and get kicked out.
Sure.
So she says, how will we know when gender equity is culture-wide in graphic novels and speculative fiction? That's a nice softball question there, Olivia.
Rather, I should say, how will you know, in your opinion, when it's been reached for you? Because it's not a blanket statement, obviously.
I want to say that I was raised by a feminist mother, but there's this bit in the Bible about like why the Jews had to travel around for 40 years. And it wasn't because it took 40 years to cross the desert. It didn't. It was because they really needed to get rid of the slave mentality generation. And I am often aware that I am still of the older mentality. I grew up and there were so many books about boys and not about girls. And I was told, literally told, well, little boys don't like reading about little girls, but little girls don't mind reading about little boys. And so I grew up in a really different time. I don't know that I will be the best judge. What I have been thrilled to do is there's a science fiction convention called Arisha in Boston. And every year there's a group that does a gender swapped table read of one of the original Star Trek scripts. And they do it in a bit of costume. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, oh, the planet Vulcan's ruled by a woman. And then you gender swap it and you're like, oh, there's one man in charge and everyone else are women, and you realize how much table dressing there was. So I think the answer is, I will know when we've reached gender equity because my daughter and my son will inform me. That's that. So the second question here, as a writer-editor, how did you come to value the visual and the aesthetic in world building as much or maybe more than language narrative? Asking because as a world builder, I'm always coming from the point of view of the environment before I think about the people, stories, exchanges that evolve within it. That's such a good question. For me, I start with idea, but I think that these things are so related. The world and the story have to function together for me. I think of story first. I always think of story. And I don't think of words. I'm probably not the most elegant wordsmith of all time. I think that what I started out being good at was dialogue. And I loved listening to what people said and didn't say. I loved the kind of dialogue. Howard Hawks particularly was really good at people doing quick banter, crosstalk. And it's a lot about what isn't said. I talked about 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which is really a wonderful movie because of how I think the dialogue is actually just fantastic. But the dialogue tells you about relationships. I think when it comes to a world, I'm interested in the relationships. So I don't know if this will help, but when I thought about Mystik U, somebody said to me like, oh, it looks too much like Hogwarts. It's too Gothic architecture. It should be more different. But that wasn't what captured my imagination. I was thinking about Dr. Occult and Rose Psychic. It's been established in DC lore are 2 sides of the same person. They're like two aspects of soul, animus and anima. But I saw them as both loving each other and competing for the role of head of school. And what's it like to be in an intimate competition? And so I just think much more about the relationships. And then I want to use the environment to put as much pressure as possible on people. I think that, you know, I don't know the simple answer, because I think in terms of creating environments, wherever you go, people are people, and they will find a way to inject conflict into every delicious environment, and so that, I think story will come out of that.
Okay, great, thanks. Robert, Robert, are you there?
I'm here.
We good for time?
Up to you.
I've got one more. Do you want me to answer one more here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Antonio Moreno says, I was wondering, how often do you consider and incorporate techniques exclusive to different writing mediums? For example, if you're writing a scary graphic novel or comic, you can end a page on a very suspenseful moment, like slowly opening a door. And then as you turn to the next page, it reveals a very scary scene or visual. Or are these the type of things at the forefront or back of your mind when writing? Yeah, I mean, I love it when I'm writing in both novels and graphic novels, because it just keeps me much more visual. I do try to doodle things and be aware of the page turn. I'm always screwing it up, and Alan is always calling me and saying, oh, you know, you goofed it again because you had this and you forgot a page. And I'm like, fixing it. But I just think the more you do a thing, the better you are at thinking in it. I wrote a scene, and Alan, I'm probably not supposed to talk about this, but I'm going to cheat and talk a little. It's not announced yet, but Alan, I see his art in my head when we're working together, because we've worked so much. And I wanted a scene where this guy is on a payphone and someone's trying to interrupt and get him to stop. And the guy says, you are very impatient. I hope time passes very quickly for you. And as he does, his eyes turn into little hourglasses. And as we pull back, we have the reveal that that young man who is pestering him is now very old. And, you know, I was able to see it that way because I've been writing comics now for, at this turn of the wheel, like I've been working on this for about a year, and Alan has begun to turn in the art. And so it was like, it just, all of my brain just connected with it. I think even a year ago when I was starting it, I might not have been able to write that in the same way and see the conceptual and the visual blend. And it was a very comic book moment, because it wouldn't be better in a movie. You know, sometimes with a movie, there are things that are better, and then there are things in a comic. I just felt it was a purely comic book moment. When I'm writing prose, there are different things that you can do. I mean, it is so much fun to be inside of people's heads as they go through whatever they're going through. That's the delight of a novel. I think the answer is, it's so good to play in different things. Push out of your comfort zone. If you've never just doodled with your hand, doodle. If you think you can't, pick up the techniques you need to doodle. It will make you a better storyteller. If you think you're not good at dialogue, practice just looking at all of the great dialogue writers and punch it up. You know, there is nothing that you cannot get better at with reading and then playing with it and doing it. So that's and if you're interested in comics, read the great comics. So many people now are just watching the TV adaptations or the movies. Comics are effing brilliant, and you should be reading more of them, all of you.
Okay, great, thanks. Robert's had to disappear. I've got one final question. because it's my best question, I think.
Yes.
What brings you joy professionally?
What brings me joy professionally is collaboration. Like those moments when I'm just like, oh my God, Alain's in Belgium, but I call him up. I'm like, I've just written something. It's blown my mind. Or he sends me a piece of artwork and I'm thinking, I cannot believe I get to do this. It's just, it's playtime. And I've been trying more and more the older I get to bring more playfulness and less anxiety to everything I create. And it is a great question, Bill.
Okay, good. I was hoping it was. Does anyone, I guess that's the end, unless anybody has yet another final question. Don't be shy now. Any further questions? And
which endless character are you? Which endless character am I? You know, I don't think that I am one of the endless, but I guess if I were one of the endless, can I give a spoiler answer? I'm probably destruction. I know it's not what people think. I think I'm probably the one who'd be like, let me just go and do some creative stuff with my dog here. So.
Okay, great. I think.
Thank you guys so much. This was really fun.
We could go on for hours, but I think, we should respect the process. And thank Elisa. That was terrific. You've been a great interviewee, presenter, person.
Thank you.
And,
thanks for having me, and it's so nice to see you guys.
Yes, good to see you too. Okay, I guess I'll hit the end button. So
thank you. That was great. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.